Stoic. Sea mist filled the lungs with the sensations only the ocean can truly provide. A subdued daylight began to poke over the high metal edges of the craft as the thick gray clouds overhead proved the sky itself was saddened by what was to come. The men next to him were likely shaking, but the anger of the sea made it difficult to detect any such subtle motions as they fought just to remain standing. His lieutenant called out, "1 minute!" As if these were the magic words to enter a clubhouse. Multiple men began to vomit, tarnishing their boondockers before their time. To his right, the young man next to him fell to his knees, his legs no longer willing to bear the burden his mind carried. Transitioning his M1 Garand to his left hand, he drove his right hand under the man's armpit, underhooking the man's shoulder. He would bear the burden for the man, and even for the briefest of moments, even when his legs desired to do the same. As the young man rose back to his feet, their eyes met, sharing a conversation words could never express. One expressing gratitude, the other confidence, both completely terrified of the unknown. "Make ready," boomed from the lieutenant. Their anxiety peaked at the top of the final wave as the heavy metal ramp of their Higgins boat began to descend. Time slowed as the mist itself clung to the last remnants of peace. Mind-numbing chaos. Hot lead tore apart the mist with no thought of the peace it was stealing. The concussion of nearby explosions pushed in on their chests. No amount of training could have prepared them for this. At 1,550 rounds per minute, the German MG-42 buzzsaws, as they called them, found far too many of their marks as death feasted upon the living all around them. A last glance to his right showed the young man's mind had long given up trying to process the scene unfolding before them as he stared blankly at the fortified hills beginning to peek over the descending door. Grabbing hold of the vapor-locked man's arms, he rushed forward down the descending ramp into the crimson beach water in front of them. The water was cold, or it should have been at least. The mind and body do incredible things under duress. Apparently, not noticing the cold water was one of them. The buzzsaws continued to tear down their brothers as they pushed forward, seeking cover. The overlapping fields of fire of the machine guns made the cover nearly impossible to find. The closer they got to the defensive gun positions, the more deafening the roar of the weapons became. They reached the base of the hill with no immediate access available to reach the bunker above them. Chancing a glance back, he saw the bloodbath behind him. It wasn't until after the battle they would learn there was a 90% casualty rate on this first wave. Why he and the young man were not part of that percentage was a conversation he and the Maker would have to have another day. He pulled an MK2 frag grenade off his vest. Under duress, the body reverts to its lowest level of training. Without even considering his actions, the pin was pulled and an overhead push sent the grenade into the bunker window above. Amidst the chaos and deafening noise, it was hard to tell if the grenade even detonated. It was the sudden silence of the buzzsaw above them that ironically enough confirmed the success of the grenade. Was it a success, though? He had never killed a man. While he couldn't be sure he had just killed anybody, if he had, should that be considered a success? Another conversation for the Maker later. Despite overwhelming odds and initial casualty rates higher than any expert had expected, they eventually took the beach, and their real involvement in the war began. For a while, he kept count of the lives he took and the brothers he lost. Some encounters were intimate in hand-to-hand combat with words shared between him and the enemy. Others were at a distance with no formality that it almost felt wrong, as if human life was not being treated with the preciousness it deserved. Eventually, the toll of lives taken and brothers lost became so high there was no way to keep record. Death was so common, it often felt inevitable, like he was just waiting for his turn. Then the war ended. His turn never came. Upon returning home, he struggled to interact with his friends and family. He wasn't sure how to talk about what he'd seen, let alone what he had done. He withdrew further and further from those around him. It was just easier. He regularly thought there's no way they would understand. What does it matter? He did not realize he was punishing those around him, whether he meant to or not. He had done so much and carried so many burdens only for those around him to pay the price. According to Oxford Languages, Stoicism is the endurance of pain or hardship without the display of feelings and without complaint. Let's be clear. Stoicism is not carrying burdens without community. In fact, later in this book, the great importance of community will be discussed in detail. Stoicism is, however, carrying burdens in a way those you care about do not pay the price for those burdens. The strong silent type is not a description worth bragging about if those around you bear the brunt of your irritability, short temper, or open anger due to not having a healthy method to cope with stress. A true Stoic finds a way to cope with stress in a healthy manner in order to ensure those entrusted to him, those he loves most, do not have to pay that price. The Creator formed men to bear significant burdens, physically, mentally, and emotionally. This begs the question, how do we cope with the brutal stresses of this life? While there are most certainly many far more educated experts in this topic, there seem to be few that seek to provide simple, tangible tools men can actually relate to and utilize. Let's look at 3 possible ideas. Number 1, beginner level. Find your person. Share each other's burdens, and in this way obey the law of Christ. Galatians 6:2. Contrary to society's opinion, we are not built to do life alone. There's nothing honorable about bearing a mental burden that destroys us from the inside. In fact, if we're willing to allow our mental deterioration, thereby not giving those entrusted to us our very best, in order to not share our stresses, we failed. Finding our person is our immediate step number 1 goal. Do not make excuses, just do it. Friendships take effort. Relationships take effort. Mentorship takes effort. It's far easier to wallow in our stresses and sorrows than to step out and build relationships. Finding a person that is willing to listen to you, not to offer temporary fixes, but to give you someone else to walk through life with you, must be of the utmost importance. Churches often have many resources, including small groups or counselors, where these relationships can begin, and would be the first and easiest choice, but not the only. Think of men you know, men who are full of wisdom. It may take courage, but can they be approached for a conversation, a cup of coffee, or even a longer relationship in which burdens can be shared? Remember, Stoicism is not silently bearing a burden with nobody else knowing, but instead finding a way to deal with those burdens or stresses in a manner where I do not make those pay the price for my inability to cope in a healthy way. Number 2, moderate level. Develop healthy coping skills. Once we've found our person we can confidently share our deepest, darkest burdens with, we need to find a way to get our mind right. Alcohol, drugs, pornography, television, video games, these are not healthy coping skills. In fact, they simply numb the pain or allow us to temporarily escape from dealing with these stresses only to be brutally confronted by those stresses at a later date, often accompanied by the shame to enhance it for our poor coping choice. Reading, writing, woodworking, working out, getting outside in nature, gardening, developing hobbies with our kids or spouse, or any host of activities that allows us time to process, time in silence, and time to decompress. Once again, this takes effort. It's far easier to get home, turn on the television, grab a beer, and pretend the world around us is not happening. The world says we deserve this. However, this is not Stoic or biblical manhood. Let us be different. Number 3, advanced. Give it to God. Wait a minute. This is the ultimate Christianese answer. Surely this is not really a suggestion, right? Let's talk about it for a minute. The ultimate goal when managing stress or carrying burdens is to get to a place where we view it through an eternal perspective. What does that look like? One simple question. How does this impact eternity? If we say we are a Christian, if we say we believe in the God of the Bible, if we say we are saved by the blood of Jesus, we must also say we believe we will be in heaven one day. If those statements are all true, then I ask again, how does this impact eternity? How does whatever burden or stress that is currently captivating your mind impact eternity? It does not mean this life is not important. It does not mean this life is not stressful. It does not mean we haven't had horrific experiences. It does mean Christ has specifically said he desires to carry these burdens for us. It does mean he knew we would be carrying these things one day and chose to die for us so that we might live forever with him in heaven, free from these very burdens. So I ask again, how do these burdens or stresses impact eternity? Can I trust that God is sovereign and at the end I will spend eternity with him in heaven? If I truly do, I can release these burdens to him. Then Jesus said, "Come to me, all of you who are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest." Matthew 11:28. This is advanced because the actual implementation of giving our burdens to Christ and no longer dwelling on them is far more difficult than what is explained in church or your weekly small group. This is a lifelong pursuit in which we will continuously fail, but that does not mean we give up. We are men. We pick ourselves up, dust ourselves off, and try again. We must strive to get to a place where we surrender all to Christ so that we are in the proper mental state to give our all to those God has entrusted to our care. Our job is to shield them from the stresses of this life, not force them to carry their own stresses and endure the consequences of ours. When is the last time you carried a burden without your behavior demanding those nearest you carry it as well? If we desire to be where the buck stops, we must live a life of stoicism, not demanding those around us endure our inability or unhealthy way of coping with the hardships of this life. In fact, we should take pride in knowing those we care about the most will never have to carry our burdens.